The promise was simple. Protect America. Bring the jobs home. Rebuild our manufacturing. The tariff walls were raised to shield the American worker, to defend the American factory, to secure the American heartland. So why then, in the third quarter of 2025, did John Deere, the very symbol of American industry, report a stunning 25% drop in profits? Why did they explicitly blame the high cost of steel and trade policies for their losses? And why, at this very moment, are American farmers, the supposed beneficiaries of a protected economy, staring at an agricultural crisis not seen in a generation? Why, according to data from the University of Illinois, did soybean shipments from the U.S. to China, their biggest customer, drop to effectively zero for 3 consecutive months this summer? This is not the story you were told. This is the story of a great economic backfire. This is how a policy designed to protect is now creating a devastating two-front war. The first front is external. It's a policy that is punishing our most loyal strategic allies like Japan and South Korea. We will look at the complex, nuanced truth behind Honda's massive $15 billion investment in Canada and the new 15% auto tariff that is quietly strangling profits. The second front is internal. It's a policy that has triggered a cascade of brutal retaliatory tariffs aimed directly at the economic heart of America, the farmer. Today, we are not just analyzing charts. We are connecting the dots. We will follow the steel from a protected mill to the rising cost of a John Deere tractor to the lost farm in Iowa. We will show how these two crises, the one with our allies and the one in our heartland, are deeply connected, and we will reveal who is really winning this trade war. Because as we'll see, it is not the American farmer. It is not the American factory worker. The men and women in Iowa and Ohio are the ones paying the price for a war they did not start. Front number 1, the ally complication. To understand the crisis in the heartland, we must first look overseas. The current trade strategy operates on 2 distinct weapons. The first is the one you know, Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum. In June of 2025, these tariffs were increased to a staggering 50% on imports from nearly every country, including our allies. This, of course, immediately raised the cost of raw materials for anyone building complex machinery inside the United States. Whether you are Ford, General Motors, or Toyota building cars in Kentucky, your steel just got more expensive. But there is a second, lesser-known weapon, a new 15% tariff, also under Section 232, aimed specifically at finished automobiles imported from allied nations, like Japan and South Korea. This isn't a cost of production. This is a direct 15% tax on their profits. It was designed to force them to move more production to the U.S. But the real-world result is far more complicated, and it reveals the chaos of this policy. Let's look at the case of Honda. In the original analysis of this situation, you heard that Honda was collapsing under tariffs and shifting its future to Canada. The headlines seem to confirm it. In April of 2024, Honda, alongside the Canadian government, announced a massive $15 billion investment to build a new electric vehicle supply chain in Ontario. It was a huge win for Canada, but the reason was not tariffs. The Canadian Prime Minister himself said it. Honda chose Canada because of its stability, its clean energy, and its access to critical minerals. Canada was offering a clear, predictable, long-term plan for the future of EV manufacturing. The U.S., by contrast, was offering instability. But the story gets far more complex. In May of 2025, just 1 year later, Honda announced it was delaying that massive $15 billion EV project for 2 years. The reason given? A global slowdown in EV demand. That part is true. The market has cooled. But here is the irony. Here is the part that proves the point. At the same time Honda was pausing its EV future in Canada, it announced it was moving production of its gas-powered CR-V from Canada to its plant in Ohio. Think about that. Why would they do that? To avoid the new 15% U.S. tariff on cars imported from Canada. Let's be perfectly clear about what just happened. The U.S. trade policy did not successfully encourage a massive new $15 billion EV investment. That investment is still going to Canada, just on delay. The policy did force an allied company, Honda, to inefficiently shuffle its existing production. It forced them to move a product line out of a plant in Canada and into a plant in Ohio, not for efficiency, not for the market, but simply to avoid a 1% penalty from its own ally. This is not a strategy for growth. This is a strategy of chaos. It creates a world where our allies from Honda in Japan to Hyundai in South Korea are forced to walk on eggshells. They are forced to make distorted, inefficient business decisions just to navigate the unpredictable political whims of Washington. They are being punished for being global companies. And this punishment, this first front of the trade war, is what sets the stage for the devastation happening back home. The damage to our allies is a problem, but the damage to our farmers is a catastrophe. Front number 2, the Great Heartland Crisis. You cannot launch a trade war without expecting retaliation. When the U.S. imposed 50% tariffs on steel and other goods, China and the European Union did not just accept it, they retaliated. And they did so with surgical precision. They did not target products that would hurt their own industries. They targeted the products that would inflict the most political and economic pain on the Uniteds. They targeted the American heartland. In February of 2025, China announced its own list of tariffs. That list included a new 10% tariff on agricultural machinery imported from the United States. Suddenly, a John Deere tractor that was already expensive just became 10% more uncompetitive in a global market. But the real devastating blow came against a simple bean: soybeans. For decades, China has been the #1 undisputed heavyweight buyer of American soybeans. It was a multi-billion-dollar relationship that formed the backbone of the entire agricultural economy. In response to U.S. tariffs, China hit back. They imposed a series of retaliatory tariffs on U.S. soybeans, which, combined with existing duties, pushed the total tariff rate for an American farmer to over 34%. For the American farmer, this was the beginning of a two-front economic war, a pincer move that is squeezing them into bankruptcy. The first blade of this pincer is collapsing revenue. Data from the University of Illinois' FarmDoc program is staggering. During the critical summer months of June, July, and August of 2025, U.S. soybean shipments to China fell to, effectively, zero. Nothing. The tap was turned off. And this market is not just disappearing, it is being stolen. As U.S. shipments flatline, Brazil's soybean exports to China skyrocketed, setting all-time records. Brazil and Argentina are aggressively filling the void. When you lose a customer of this magnitude, you do not simply get them back when the political winds change. You are forcing them to build new supply chains. You are forcing them to sign new long-term contracts with your competitors. That is the first blade of the pincer. Your income has vanished. The second blade is exploding costs. At the exact same time your revenue is collapsing, your cost of doing business is exploding. Why? Because to grow those soybeans, you need a tractor. You need a harvester. You need a John Deere. And what is that John Deere tractor made of? Steel. The same American-made steel that is now 50% more expensive because of the Section 232 tariffs. John Deere cannot absorb that cost. No company can. In their third quarter earnings report for 2025, John Deere stated that trade tariffs would cost their company more than $500 million this year alone. That $500 million cost doesn't just vanish, it is passed on. It is passed directly to the American farmer, who is already fighting for his life. This is the two-front war, and it is crushing the life out of the American heartland. Imagine for a moment you are a third-generation farmer in Iowa. It's November 2025. Your entire crop of soybeans is harvested, sitting in a silo, and you have nowhere to sell it. The Chinese market is gone. The price has collapsed. That's pincer blade 1. At the same time, your 10-year-old harvester, which you've been trying to keep alive, finally breaks down. A new transmission. You go to the dealer. The part alone, which is also subject to tariffs, is 40% higher than it was last year. You can't afford it. So you look at a new machine. The dealer with regret in his eyes tells you the price of a new harvester, the same one you looked at 2 years ago, has gone up by $50,000. Why? The cost of steel, the tariffs, that's pincer blade 2. You have no income. You have exploding costs. You cannot sell your product. You cannot afford the tools to make your product. You were promised protection, but you are the one being squeezed from both sides by your own government's policy. This is not a theory. This is the reality. That $500 million tariff cost to John Deere is not just a number in a report. It's a very real number that led the company to lay off 238 workers at its plants in Illinois and Iowa this year. Those are the very jobs the tariffs were supposed to protect. The promise was simple. The reality is a catastrophe, the unintended winner. So we have a crisis. We have allies like Honda being punished and forced into chaotic, inefficient decisions. We have farmers in Iowa being bankrupted by a two-front war of no revenue and high costs. And we have iconic American companies like John Deere absorbing $500 million in losses and laying off Midwest workers. The policy is clearly failing. But the final irony, the final devastating consequence, is finding out who is actually winning. So what did John Deere do? What did this iconic American company do when faced with 50% steel tariffs at home and 10% retaliatory tariffs on their finished goods abroad? In January of 2025, they announced a new $55 million manufacturing plant. That plant is in Mexico. According to reports from Mexico News Daily, the new $55 million facility will begin production in 2026. It will specialize in building small wheel loaders and track loaders. Why Mexico? Because Mexico has what the United States, under this policy, does not. It has stable, predictable trade agreements with the rest of the world. It is not engaged in a self-destructive trade war. The steel it imports is not subject to the same 50% tariff. The finished goods it exports are not subject to the same 10% retaliatory tariffs from China. This is the great backfire in its entirety. A policy designed to bring jobs home has resulted in an iconic American company taking $55 million and building its new factory in Mexico. Now, we must be intellectually honest. If you go to John Deere's corporate website, as we did, you will find an entire section dedicated to myth busting. They have a page that says, Myth, John Deere is gutting its Iowa factories. And they will tell you, correctly, that they are also investing millions of dollars in their U.S. plants in Iowa and Illinois. And they are right. But this fact does not contradict our thesis. It proves it. The reality is not that John Deere is abandoning America. The reality is that these tariffs have forced a smart, 180-year-old American company into a corner. In a global competitive market, uncertainty is the enemy. An unpredictable 50% tariff is the definition of uncertainty. When you cannot predict your costs, when you cannot predict your markets, you do not double down. You de-risk, you hedge. John Deere is still investing in Iowa, but it is hedging its bet by also investing $55 million in Mexico, a country with more policy stability. That $55 million, those jobs, that factory, could have been in Ohio, or Michigan, or Pennsylvania, but it is not. It is in Mexico. Because in the 21st century global economy, capital does not flow to the most protected market. It flows to the most predictable one. Canada and Mexico have become strategic oases, benefiting directly from the chaos created by U.S. policy. They are the unintended, or perhaps the inevitable, winners. The final calculation. Let's return to the beginning. The promise was simple: protect America. But we end with a devastating and complex reality. Let's review the facts. 1. The tariffs have punished our allies like Honda. They have not inspired new investment. They have only created chaos, forcing companies to shuffle production just to avoid penalties. 2. The tariffs have triggered a two-front war on the American farmer. Retaliation from China has evaporated their largest market, while the steel tariffs have simultaneously gifted them with $500 million in higher machinery costs. 3. The policy has forced iconic American companies like John Deere to hedge their own future by investing $55 million in new factories in Mexico. The policy did not protect the worker. It did not protect the farmer. It simply exported manufacturing jobs to Mexico and imported an agricultural crisis to Iowa. The story of steel and soybeans, of Honda and John Deere, is just one half of this crisis. The other half, the one that will define the next 50 years, is the shadow war being fought for the materials of the future, critical minerals for EV batteries. And while America is busy fighting this trade war, Canada is quietly building an end-to-end, mine-to-vehicle supply chain that could decide the future of the entire auto industry. Click here to watch our next investigation, The Shadow War, How Canada is Securing the EV Future. This leads us to our final and most important question. A question for you. If you are that farmer in Iowa or a factory worker in Ohio, who do you see as the bigger threat to your livelihood? Foreign competition or the unintended consequences of domestic policy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.